The economy is in shambles, inflation is through the roof, and the government is lying about it. Several experts believe that the inflation rate is actually in the double digits, with some actually saying it could be as high as 30%. Now, when I talk to friends of mine who are big on economics and the stock market, the estimate they've given me is like 12%. So I think Max Kaiser is a good example. This guy's been covering finance. He's been on Wall Street, like 12%. This is significant because people are quite upset with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And surprise, surprise, Jimmy Kimmel blames sexism and racism for Kamala Harris's historically low approval rating. That's right. The late night comedian previously hosted a show that portrayed girls jumping on trampolines. Racism and sexism. My friends, at 28% approval, say goodbye to Kamala Harris being plan B to an aging Joe Biden. 28% approval. Why? Joe Biden's approval rating is at 38%, according to several polls. In aggregate, he's at about 41%. So there are some favorable polls in there and some bad ones. Among independent voters, Joe Biden's approval rating is at 25%. And that's where it really matters. But even Democrats are souring on Joe Biden. As the leader of this country, which is what the president basically is, a lot of people blame Joe Biden for all of the failures and the failing economy and the struggle and the strife, COVID, etc., the failures in Afghanistan. But there's still some things they probably think he's doing well, or more importantly, many of the tribalist Democrats probably just blindly support Joe Biden and they won't back down. Kamala Harris, what is she doing? I mean, for real, like, what is she doing? She was supposed to go down to the border and deal with the border crisis. She didn't do that. I mean, she eventually did, but she avoided it. So basically, you've got a vice president nowhere to be seen, a country that's in dire straits, and everybody's upset about it. So surprise, surprise, the lady who couldn't even get a single delegate in the Democratic primary has a very low approval rating. We all knew that Joe Biden was the corporeal form they needed to stand up against Donald Trump. At least that's what The Atlantic said. They said, stay alive, Joe Biden. All we need is your corporeal form. So a lot of people didn't care for Joe Biden at all. But people despise Kamala Harris. People genuinely despise this woman. She laughs during very serious crises. When talking about children dying on the border, she goes, it's no surprise people don't like her, and it has nothing to do with racism or sexism. If it was a man coming out and laughing when asked about dying children, people would be upset with that person too. You see, Joe Biden doesn't do that. The problem with Joe Biden is that he doesn't know where he is and he's doing a bad job. Some people still give him the benefit of the doubt. Jimmy Kimmel, however, is playing the game we all know and expected. Fox News reports ABC late night host Jimmy Kimmel revealed Tuesday that he thought at least part of the driving force behind Kamala Harris's historically poor approval rating, racism and sexism. During his opening monologue, Kimmel joked about the reasons Harris's approval rating would be so low, claiming it made no sense because she basically has nothing to do, but ultimately blamed sexism and racism and amid his comedic attempts. Americans really aren't happy with Vice President Kamala Harris, Kimmel said. Kamala Harris has an approval rating of 28%, which makes no sense because she basically has nothing to do. I mean, it's like criticizing a backup quarterback. Tom Brady, he's okay. I don't love the way Blaine Gabbert has his legs folded on the bench. I have to be honest. What? Kamala Harris has a job as the president of the Senate, as the tie-breaking vote in Senate decision-making when you have a 50-50 Senate. She's not sitting around doing nothing. She's doing her job as the vice president. Is anyone surprised by this? Kimmel pointed out that Harris's approval rating of 28%, according to a recent USA Today Suffolk poll, was lower than Dick Cheney's in 2008, following an incident in which he unintentionally shot someone quail hunting. I think I know why Kamala's ratings are so low, besides racism and sexism, which are the obvious ones. It's because whenever she's next to Joe Biden, standing near or behind him, she looks like an assassin, Kimmel said, appearing serious when mentioning sexism and racism. He didn't provide any examples as to why Harris's approval rating would be low for those reasons. Despite calling out sexism as a reason for Harris's low approval rating, Kimmel has a history of questionable portrayals of women. I honestly don't care about the Man Show and Jimmy Kimmel having women jump on trampolines. If they like it, they're allowed to have it. Now, if he wants to criticize other people for being sexist, I think there's some interesting questions there. But I also think it's fair to point out, just because you have a show where women jump on trampolines doesn't mean you are sexist. You can make jokes and be funny. The point of the win on trampolines, in my opinion, on the Man Show, was meant to be over the top and funny. Not seriously degrading women. The women were there jumping up and down, enjoying it as well. I don't think it's degrading when you have two consenting adults agreeing to engage in jokes or coming on a show. It's just meant to be funny. I'm not going to blame Jimmy Kimmel for that because I'm not Jimmy Kimmel. He wants to play these stupid games by all means. But my friends, let's talk about what's really going on. I thought it was relevant to bring up the Kamala Harris approval rating in reference to the racism and sexism because the Democrats and their lackeys in media only have one response for the most part. There's no reason to be upset with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. And the real reasons, besides, sexism and racism, it's because these people are in a cult. Not every single person on the left is in the cult, but for the most part, they are. They blindly believe this stuff and they ignore what's in front of their faces. And what's in front of their faces is that the country is falling apart and we have more data. Take a look at this tweet. This is from Bow-Tied Bull. I'm not going to pretend that Bow-Tied Bull is the bastion of economic knowledge, but a decent following on Twitter, tracking Bitcoin, and they said, "Man, you cannot fool Americans into believing inflation is only 6.2%. It's 30%. Cernovich says 15 to 25%. There is zero shot. It's single digits. Zero, like banks." One person responded, at the very least, it's 15 to 30% on ish people actually buy a need. Groceries, gas, housing, household goods. Yes, I have a few tweets for you. First, I'll give you the official statement. Heather Long says, breaking, U.S. inflation was up 6.2% in October over a year ago. That's the highest inflation in 31 years. Inflation was up 0.9% in October alone, a much higher increase than 0.4% in September and 0.3% in August. Prices are rising for food, energy, shelter, used cars, and new cars. And here's a tweet from Jackie Kotkowicz. I'm not familiar. She's the director of policy research for the GOP. She tweeted out, "Prices continue to skyrocket under Biden. Gas is up 49.6%, bacon 20%, eggs 11.6%, fresh fish 11%, pork chops 16%, shoes 5.2%, dresses 9.2%, TVs 10%, computers 8.4%, sporting goods 8.7%. Used cars and trucks are up 26.4%, and car and truck rentals 39.1%. She goes on to say, your Thanksgiving will cost more thanks to Bidenflation. I love that word, by the way, Bidenflation. Poultry, 7.5, ham, 7.6, beefsteak, 24%. Spices are at 5, rolls at 5, crackers and bread, 7.5, canned veggies, 6.6, potatoes, a meager 1.7. Coffee is about 5%, cakes and cupcakes, 6.6, apples, 6.7. There's a viral image going around where a turkey in 2020 was like $25, and today it's like $55. I talk to people all the time. They go to the grocery store. They are being rocked by inflation. And it's Joe Biden's fault. It's the Democrats' fault. And they'll tell you it's not, but it was Joe Biden who pushed the eviction moratorium. I'm sorry, when you give free money to people, you disincentivize work. And there's a whole slew of reasons. Look, the economy is a complicated beast. But when people are being given free money, you have a few problems. One, people who work in landlords, for instance, right? The left likes to say it's not a job. Sure. Managing a building is not a fun job. Owning the building and renting it out doesn't make you as much money as these people think. So often the landlords they're referring to are major corporate landlords. Let's talk about the small mom and pop landlords. Maybe own one building, live in the basement, and rent out the top 2 floors. People were able to live in those houses free of charge. The landlords are still responsible for fixing everything. What happens? They go into debt paying the bills. We've seen many of these stories. This is just one example. Eviction moratorium illegally enforced by Joe Biden when the Supreme Court struck it down. Now, retirees are saying they're making me fix the sink and the heating, but they're not paying rent. The landlords, and we, again, heard many of these stories, go in debt using credit cards to pay the bills because they're legally obligated to fix these properties, even though people aren't paying their rent. Now, I don't necessarily blame the people who aren't paying their rent for the most part. These are people who lost their jobs due to the lockdowns from Democratic governors and mayors. And Joe Biden offered up free money to many of these people with the extending the unemployment benefits. Many of these people, and not all of them, decided not to pay rent because they didn't have to. Again, many stories. Now, I'm not trying to say that the plural of anecdote is data. I'm just saying that this is a contributing factor to inflation. Because you end up with people, landlords, they can't pay the bills. So what happens? When the leases finally expire and they're able to either evict or the people are forced to move out, they now need to recuperate the losses to help solve their debt problems. What do? They increase the rent to the maximum they can. All of a sudden now, rent for this apartment that was $2,000 is $2,500 because the landlords lost money. And these are mom and pop retirees that saved up money, bought a single building. I'm not talking about major corporate property owners. That I understand people being like, screw them, because these big firms were buying up properties and screwing over the working class. But that's not most properties. I think the majority of properties are owned by like retail, mom and pop retirees. Then we have gas prices. Joe Biden's actually talking about shutting down another pipeline. They're actually being told the vaccine mandate is on hold by the Fifth Circuit, and the Biden administration comes out, their deputy press secretary tells people, ignore the court ruling and do it anyway. All of this shakes confidence in the system. You have a rogue president abusing his power, and regular people know it. And Kamala Harris is right there, voting on and approving Democrat policy, and people are sick of it. Let me show you some news, my friends, and explain the realities. They want to hide behind racism and sexism. The Daily Mail reports household debt hits a record high of $15 trillion as home and car prices soar and Americans splurge on credit card purchases. Americans don't have the cash to pay for this. They are racking up debt. Then they need to make more money than their debt. Inflation happens. Imagine, and most of you probably already know this. You're making $15 an hour. They shut everything down. You're now not working. Some people are getting free money and some people aren't. Many people now unable to pay their bills because they're out of work because of the shutdowns start using credit cards to buy food. They rack up credit card debt. Now, as they re-enter the workforce, not only do they need to maintain their standard of living, which is like health care, food, and rent, they also have to pay down the debts on their credit cards and the debts they racked up during the crisis, during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. So now they're going to their bosses and saying, or their bosses or potential companies they're trying to get a job at, $15 won't cut it. I need 20. Because that $15 might help cover the costs of, food and rent and healthcare, which it probably won't. Let's be real. But I got to pay off this debt now that I racked up. The company then says, if we pay you $20 an hour, we got to raise the price of food. So they do. Then the people who are getting these jobs go and get lunch at a restaurant across the street. All of a sudden they find that the burger they used to buy at $10 is now $15. Now all of a sudden they're like, $20 isn't cutting it because I can't even afford to buy a burger. Inflation is hitting across the board, and it has a lot to do with the Democrats' policy. It has a lot to do with the blue states shutting everything down. It has a lot to do with Donald Trump, too. 15 days to slow the spread happened under him. And it was that train wreck, the economy grinded to a halt. And then, to be fair, shortly after Donald Trump said he thinks things should reopen, but he doesn't have the power to force states to do it. In places like South Dakota, Texas, and Florida, they reopened very quickly and their economies are booming. But for many independents in blue states, many moderate voters, they are saying, we do not approve of the job you have done. Kamala Harris is supposed to be doing something about Joe Biden's failures. Nothing. Literally nothing. So you want to know why people are more likely to disapprove of Kamala Harris? Does it have anything to do with racism or sexism? Let's be real. Yes, some of it. But what, 0.1%? She gets elected. Americans voted for Barack Obama twice. This is not an issue of racism or sexism. Barack Obama enjoyed a very high approval rating for the majority of his presidency. And it went down later on. That's common for the most part. But people approved of Obama across the board. They loved him. He was charismatic, even though he was blowing up kids. Now the problem is that Joe Biden is floundering and babbling and in crisis, and Kamala Harris is literally doing nothing. So, of course, people are upset with her. They never liked her in the first place. And I'll tell you this, if there was one metric I could go by to help you understand why people despise Kamala Harris, it's that she laughs in the face of devastation. Joe Biden doesn't do that. Let's be real. Joe Biden might say things like chin on a shot of pressure and bat-a-calf care. He may stumble and stammer and fart or whatever it is he does. But when asked serious questions, The worst thing we get from him is, come on, man. Of course it's bad. Come on, man. How about that? People may say, I don't think he's all there, and I don't think he has the ability to do the job. But when Kamala Harris is questioned about the border, she laughs. When she's questioned about riots, she laughs. She laughs. The American people are facing massive debt. And the narrative from Democrats is that inflation is good. MSNBC runs this story. We get statements from some of Biden's cabinet like, actually, inflation isn't all that bad. And it's just transitory. Lying, nonstop. First, they said there was no inflation. Then they said it's only a little bit. Then they said, don't worry, it's transitory. Now we're at the point where they're like, inflation is good. These reports are coming out where they're like, it's time to ask for a raise. Inflation is a good thing. No, it isn't. You can't afford to buy milk, bread, and eggs anymore. And they're saying, but at least you can ask for a raise. Oh, why? So I can hopefully be able to buy milk, bread, and eggs? And that's on the Democrats who control everything. They've got Congress, they've got the Senate, they've got the executive branch, and let's be real, the Supreme Court is not some conservative bastion the media is making it out to be. Certainly it leans conservative in some respects, but it's not like it's staunch far right or anything like that. It's fairly middle of the road in how they've been handling their rulings. But Democrats have everything. So don't be surprised when the Democratic Party is like, Joe Biden's approval rating among Democrats at 75%, according to Civics, around 75. Don't be surprised when even Democrat voters aren't going to sit back and accept the lies anymore. Because at a certain point when you're like, I can't afford gas. And then they tell you, oh, that's because you're racist and sexist. That's why you're really angry. At a certain point, you can't lie to the people who are experiencing the problems that you created. Someone comes to Jimmy Kimmel, this is a hypothetical, and says, I can't afford gas. And he goes, are you upset about it? I actually am. I don't think Kamala Harris is doing a good job. Well, that's because you're a racist and you're a sexist. And it's like you say that to someone and they're literally saying to you, no, I'm just mad I can't buy gas. Like, I don't care if Kamala Harris is a woman, Indian, Jamaican, whatever. That's fine. In fact, actually, I think a lot of people think it's a good thing. They're like, hey, great, a different perspective. But she's doing a bad job. Or I should say she's doing no job at all. Take a look at this. Total debt balance and its composition. We have this total U.S. household debt increased by $286 billion to $15.24 trillion in the third quarter of 2021 after leveling off for much of the pandemic. These are people suffering. These are people taking out loans, having to sell their homes, losing their retirements, desperate because the economy is in dire straits. Joe Biden said he didn't run on polls. His polling is in the gutter. And he's like, well, people are upset about COVID and supply chain issues. And it's like, bro, that's you. They're mad at you as the president. What is Joe Biden doing? Vaccine mandates. He doesn't get it. Vaccine mandates are hurting the economy. I mean, it's a fact. You look at Florida and Texas. Their COVID rates are going down. California's going up. In Florida and Texas, the economy is booming. South Dakota, the economy is booming. South Dakota, there was one graph that came out as one of the only states to grow over the past year because they never forced people to shut down. Mandates and restrictions hurt people. They did not help. I'm not convinced that they actually slowed the spread because even Dr. Fauci said it. He was asked this was several months ago, Florida's rates were going down, New York's going up. He goes, I have no answer for this. Yeah, because when humans try to centralize power, thinking they're smarter than nature or market forces, they just cause chaos. And regular people can see that. The smartest thing the Democrats could have done is said, we'll take reasonable precautions to protect the vulnerable. But for the most part, it's an act of nature. Then when people say, look at all these bad things, they say, listen, we don't have the authoritarian right to restrict your rights, so don't blame us for it. Instead, they said, we do have the right to do that. And the Democrats then started locking people down and effectively destroying livelihoods. You think the people in New York and across this country are going to forget that? No. Jimmy Kimmel, you know him, you love him. He's going to come out and look you in the eyes as you lose your job, as you lose your business, as you're struggling through debt and say, the only reason you're mad is because you're racist. It's incredible, isn't it? As if you, the American voter, don't know exactly why you are mad. It's funny. I see a lot of these journalists. There's these journalists that I've known for a long time working out of like Columbia and CUNY saying that the narrative around critical race theory is all fake. And it's pushed by right-wing propagandists. And I'm like, that mother who's testifying in front of a school board in Loudoun County demanding their resignation is not blindly believing some fringe right-wing website. She's telling a story about how her own child came to her making racist comments that they learned in school. And the parent says, I don't want my kids learning this neo-racist garbage. And what do you get? Progressives, Democrats, politicians just keep telling you you're wrong. I'll tell you this. When they come out and say it's a lie, they wrap a lot of people up in the cult. Jimmy Kimmel can come out and blame racism and sexism, and people will believe it. There are a lot of people who will tribalistically just blindly support the Democratic Party no matter what. And they're going to be like, I think everything's fine. I'm getting free money and I can't be evicted. So clearly the problem must be racists. But something happens when the unemployment benefits dry up and the eviction moratorium ends. All of a sudden now people are like, hey, things are really bad. The Democrats seem to be maintaining support by bribing people. Indirectly, mind you, giving them free rent, arguably in violation of the Third Amendment, depending on if some of these people were service members, giving them free money and then blaming the problems on everybody else. And there are people who buy it up. I wish those people would pay attention to the news. I'll leave it there. We got big news. I'm wrapped up in the Rittenhouse trial, but still trying to make sure I'm getting those segments out. 4 p.m., big breaking story on what's going on with Kyle Rittenhouse. He's testifying. I'll leave it there. I will see you all over at youtube.com/Timcast at 4 p.m. Thanks for hanging out.